So welcome everybody. This is 15.7 on special parallelograms. So we talked about what a parallelogram is, right? And all the characteristics of a parallelogram. Opposite sides are parallel, opposite sides are congruent, opposite sides or opposite angles are also congruent, and the diagonals bisect each other, right? Those four things, right? So all of these parallelograms that we're going to go through has all of those characteristics. Okay, that's the foundation of all of these parallelograms, and then some. Okay, so what are the characteristics that a rhombus, a rectangle, rhombus, or square have that makes it a parallelogram? And what special characteristic do these quadrilaterals have? Okay, that's what we're going to go through. And the first one is a rectangle. So why is a rectangle a parallelogram? It's because the rectangle have opposite sides that are congruent. Okay? Since they have opposite sides that are congruent and they hold one of the four characteristics of a parallelogram, it's a parallelogram. Okay, they hold all of them, but I just highlighted one of them. Okay, because opposite side or opposite angles that are congruent. Okay, and the opposite sides are congruent. So again, they hold all four. So you can just highlight one, and that's why it's a p-gram. Okay, what special characteristic do they have? Well, all the angles are right angles, and we all know that, right? They're all 90 degrees. Opposite sides are congruent, right? And that's from being a parallelogram. But the special characteristics that they do have is that all the angles are right angles. Okay? And their diagonals. Okay, so if I draw a diagonal here and a diagonal here, their diagonals are also congruent. So they bisect each other and they're congruent. So I know that all of these parts, right, these segments that are created are also equal to each other. Okay, that makes sense? Yes. Okay, so that's what a rectangle is. And a rhombus, why is it a parallelogram? It's because a rhombus has opposite sides that are congruent. Okay, so that side's congruent to that side, and that side is congruent to that side. And the next slide, we're gonna actually talk about something that's a little more special about what a parallelogram is, or what a rhombus is. Okay, the special characteristics that the rhombus holds is that all sides are congruent. So all of these guys are equal to each other. And if I draw out the diagonals again, right? They will intersect at a 90-degree angle. Okay, so I know that they are perpendicular. Okay, they're not congruent like a rectangle is, but they will intersect at a 90-degree angle. Okay, and the final characteristic that rhombus has is that the diagonals bisect the angles that it cuts. So this diagonal here, going from left to right, they're equal to each other. And since this whole angle is congruent to this whole angle, they're all equal to each other. Okay, likewise for these guys as well. Okay. So for example, if I give you, let's say you have a problem and you're given that this is, let's say 35 degrees, right? And that's all I give you. And I want the angles, I want all the angles. Well, if that's 35 degrees, this is 35 degrees, this is 35 degrees, and this is 35 degrees, right? So 35 plus 35, that's 70. So that whole thing here is 70, right? So 70 plus 70, that's 140. You know a quadrilateral is 360. So 360 minus 140, that is 220, right? So these two angles have to equal 220, the remaining angles. And those angles, right? If I divide 220 by 2, divided by 2, that's 110. So that whole angle here is 110 degrees. This whole angle here is 110 degrees. Right? Everybody follow the logic? Yeah. And if they're both 110 degrees, half of 110 will be 55. So this angle is 55 degrees. This angle is 55 degrees. This angle is 55. This angle is 55 degrees, right? So even when I give you, or the problem gives you the start of one angle, you can figure out all of them just using the characteristics of what a rhombus is. Okay? All right. So a square, right? And that's our last special parallelogram. Because a square has opposite angles, sides and angles that are congruent. Okay? And you can take it a step further and say that the square class is the most specialized parallelogram that you can see. Okay? Because you know a square is a square because all sides are congruent, right? You know that this side is congruent to this side, and this side is congruent. So they're all congruent to each other, right? That's what a cube is, or that's what a square is. Yeah, so if I know that that's 5, I know that this is 5, I know that this is 5, I know that this is 5, right? All the angles are right angles, just like a rectangle. Okay, so it's gonna have all of the characteristics of a rhombus and a rectangle. All right, the diagonals are congruent. And if I highlight all of these, or if I draw out all of these characteristics, it's just gonna be a big mess, right? It's gonna get confusing. So I'm just gonna leave it like this and just talk about it. The diagonals are congruent. All the sides are congruent. The diagonals are perpendicular. Okay, just like a rhombus. And the diagonals bisect the angles just like a rhombus. So if you look at the list of characteristics, right? All the angles are right angles. That's from the rectangle. right? Diagonals are congruent is from the rectangle. All sides are congruent, that's from the rhombus. Diagonals are perpendicular, that's from the rhombus. And the diagonals bisect each other, that's also from the rhombus. Okay? So you can see that the square is just like they hold all of the characteristics. Okay? Does that make sense? So this last slide I made just to kind of highlight the connections between the two, between all of the quadrilaterals there are. This is called the quadrilateral umbrella. Okay, so under this umbrella, there are two strands. There are the parallelogram strand and the trapezoid strand. The trapezoid strand is just one pair of parallel sides, and we're not going to talk about that, right? But they're a quadrilateral because it has four sides, but that's just another whole different lesson. Okay, that's a different strand of parallelograms that we're dealing with. Okay. Underneath the parallelogram strand, though, underneath this strand, right, we have a rectangle, we have a rhombus. Okay. They hold special characteristics because that's why they're below the parallelogram. Okay. And then a rectangle and a rhombus, if you put them together, they make a square. All right. So I can say from this that all squares are, let's just pick one, rectangles. True or false? Can I say this? All squares are rectangles. Can I say that? Yes, because any square you get, I know that all the angles are 90 degrees, and that characteristic is a characteristic of a rectangle. Does that make sense? Yeah. Can I say all, let's just flip it. Rectangles are squares. Let me just use this word. Are squares. No, right? I can't say all squares. Some squares, yes. So, or some rectangles, yes, are squares, right? But not all of them. So as you go up this ladder, I'm going to put all. All squares are rectangles. All squares are rhombuses. All squares are parallelograms. All rectangles are parallelograms. All rhombuses are parallelograms, right? Going up, I can say all. Coming back down, I'm just going to put some. Okay. Some rhombuses are squares. Some parallelograms are rhombuses. Some parallelograms are rectangles. Some rectangles are squares. Some rhombuses are squares. Okay. So that's how you can kind of see them. All right. Any questions? All right. And that's the lesson for today, class. And I will see you on the next one.